Good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time it is where you are, and welcome to Nat Chat. I'm Nat Eliason, and as you may or may not know, I'm currently exploring what to do as a college student or recent graduate dissatisfied with a somewhat broken college system funneling people into one-size-fits-all postgraduate lives and careers. In this episode, we have Helen Guo. Helen attended Georgetown University and was on a pretty typical career path until the last minute. She'd interned with and accepted a full-time offer from the investment bank Morgan Stanley, and then right before she would have started working with them, she reneged on her offer and decided to work for herself instead. Since then, she started a company providing on-the-go phone charging around New York City. She did healthy food delivery, and now, most recently, she's designing and selling a low-calorie, low-carb pasta. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but she explains how she's been able to make that work in the interview. In the episode, we go through her experience during and after college working for herself, starting new projects and companies, how she started pursuing this kinds of work, and what she's learned along the way. We also cover how she's been able to systematically meet accomplished people in her field to learn from, how she's maintained a good relationship with her parents who were very against this career shift, as well as some of the mental and emotional challenges that come from this kind of work, especially when you have to shut down the project you've been dedicating the past year or more of your life to. When we recorded this interview, her new company, Balloon Foods, didn't have a site up yet, but depending on when you're listening to this, you might be able to find it at balloonfoods.com. Either way, definitely say hi to Helen on Instagram at Guo Helen, that's Guo Helen, Helen, and you can find Balloon Foods there as well at Balloon Foods. And with that, let's bring on Helen. Helen, thank you so much for coming on the show and for joining us today.
Yeah, of course. How are you doing, Nat?
I am doing excellent. I'm excited to dive in on some of the work stuff pretty soon here, but I wanted to actually start with something you touched on really briefly before we got started here, which was these 2 or 3 months traveling all over the US, Guatemala, Asia, recently, because I'd been following you on Instagram and you were posting all these amazing pictures from all over the world. And I was really curious, how were you affording to do that? Because you were in between projects then, right? Like, what was the impetus
Right.
for this trip too?
Right. So I was in between a few projects then and I had some time off. So, I live in New York City and it's actually very expensive to live here, not surprisingly. And I actually found that it was cheaper to travel abroad to, places where I could stay in a hostel or somewhere for very cheap. So I went to Eastern Europe for a long time. I was in Asia, in Thailand for a while, and um, I was recently in Guatemala for a week with a friend. And it's actually surprisingly cheap to travel because, you can show up to a place, stay in somewhere for, $5 or $10 a night, spend, really not much money on pretty good food, and yeah, I just live the life.
How were you finding these $5 or $10 a night places? Because when you say that, I'm imagining rundown, nasty hostels that people don't necessarily want to spend their night in.
Right. Actually, I mean, a lot of the hostels are nicer than you would expect. There are a lot of places you can go to where you can stay in a dorm bed for, $5 to $10 a night, and they're totally reasonable, totally clean and fine, and they have a lot of activities as well that you can, attend. And for example, in Guatemala, I stayed in a tent for a few days, and there are a lot of things you can do that make it very cheap to travel. So I would say that's especially when you go into a country where you can spend $20 a day or less. You can find clean, living options for very cheap.
Do you do any sort of travel hacking with flights and stuff?
I don't. I should, but I just find I find whatever is cheapest.
Hmm.
I just book it. And oftentimes my hack is just I'll leave a day before. Sometimes like the day before you leave, you can actually find really good deals.
Oh, so you
Very
book them
random,
last minute?
very last minute. I booked a ticket to Stockholm
Hmm.
and it was like $300 round trip,
Oh, geez.
and I left the next day.
It's
So
kind of fun.
yeah,
I've been meaning to do that sometime. Just go to the airport randomly and book a flight somewhere for that day or the next day. It's like a
right.
good
It's really
adventure.
it's really random. I mean, usually the day before you leave, it's more expensive, but occasionally you find these deals. So
All right. Well, we'll have to try that sometime. But as we were saying, this was in between two projects for you, right?
Hmm.
And what I wanted to start with actually was this latest one that you're spinning up now, right? This is Balloon Foods.
Yes, correct. So basically, yeah, so for the past few months, I've been working on creating the first low-calorie pasta. So, it's under 50 calories of serving. It's gluten-free. There's only about 2 grams of net carbs per serving. And I've been developing this pasta, initially out of my kitchen and now working with a small manufacturer to basically produce a shelf-stable product.
That's pretty cool. How did you get interested in creating that?
Yeah, so I've been kind of in the food space, the health food space for a while now, and um, I really saw an opportunity in pasta where, in other foods, people, in terms of, people trying to make healthier options,
Hmm.
there have been a few companies that have been making healthy pastas, but, I didn't think that they really addressed the core issue of why people, associate pasta with being unhealthy. And for me, it's always been, it's just carbs, a lot of carbs,
Right.
and that also means a lot of calories. And, the pastas out there that are healthy are just gluten free. And that doesn't, solve many other problems that people actually, feel are associated with pasta.
What are they usually replacing the gluten with that doesn't make it as healthy?
Right. It's about the fact that, regular pasta, so like durum wheat pasta is not super nutritious, I would say. It's, processed and not super nutritious. So it's just one product with water. Well, I mean, one ingredient with water and not necessarily a lot of protein and, very high in carbs for what you're getting. So the companies out there have basically tried to say, okay, we're just going to make high protein pastas with, whether it's chickpea flour, or lentil flour, or quinoa, or corn, or whatever it is. They're trying to say we're going to make this more nutritious by, adding protein. And my approach has been, very different because I'm approaching this as, pasta is kind of like a base you use to, as a base of a meal. You add sauces, you add meat to it, you add whatever. If you're vegan or vegetarian, you might add tofu or whatever it is. And so my approach is, let's make this as low calorie and low in carbs as possible, and let people add whatever they want, and, not feel guilty about it.
And was this something that you discovered as an opportunity from the startup you were working on before Picnic?
Yeah, so I guess somewhat. I was working on this company that basically delivered healthy meals around Lower Manhattan, and we did discover that people really care about the calories in the foods they're eating, and we tracked a lot of this data and what people cared about. In terms of gluten free is something people really care about, but calories was like the number one thing, and especially now when people also care about, you know, being more on like a lower carb diet. A lot of popular diets are that way now. It kind of struck me, what foods what foods don't fit in this criteria right now? Why don't they exist? So pasta came as kind of a natural. I love pasta. I grew up eating a lot of pasta, and I stopped eating pasta a few years back when I realized, just a lot of carbs. So that was kind of the first thing. And then, what happened was then we approached a bunch of experts, like pasta makers, chefs, etc. And everyone was like, this is impossible. You want to make a low calorie pasta. And I was like, yeah, okay, maybe you're saying it's impossible, but I'm going to try it out. So I started making like an alternative or finding a way to make an alternative pasta in my kitchen a few months ago. And since then, yeah, I've just come up with a few different solutions of my own, and I'm now basically figuring out how to make it a shelf stable product, which is this, whole other challenge of its own.
Yeah, I'm sure. But this is obviously pretty different from the food delivery. So, if you don't mind me asking, what made you want to shut that product down or project down?
Yeah, sure. to be honest, we couldn't raise the money to expand the business to what it, needed to be to make this kind of an interesting project, not to make it more than just a project and kind of an interesting venture. And, the reason we couldn't raise money, it was very valid. The economics behind food delivery are really, abysmal. And, I went into it being like, if this is high volume, we're going to make this work. But it's a very capital intensive business. I wouldn't recommend anyone go into food delivery or meal delivery. And it was, especially for us, we were, trying to make it it wasn't cold. The supply chain is very hot. We were dealing with last mile logistics and all these issues. And it just became much more of a logistics business than a food business, which is, why I wanted to go into it, because I'm passionate about food. So we decided to shut it down, and that's when I, went traveling for a while.
Was that just general interest in food what inspired you to start it in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a big foodie family, so food has always been a huge part of my life. And when I was starting in high school and going to college, I played a lot of sports, and that also made me a lot more health conscious and aware of what I was eating. So I've pretty much been very interested in how do we create new foods or make combinations, or how do we basically create products that improve our health and that can potentially replace what we're eating now without feeling like we're missing something necessarily.
Yeah. And did you go straight to working on this after college?
No. So in terms of the meal delivery, I started just under a year after I graduated.
Okay.
So I actually, right before graduation, I had a job, and I actually emailed them and told them I wasn't going like a month before.
Oh God, what was the job?
So I had an offer from Morgan Stanley,
Okay.
the investment bank, and yeah, I accepted the offer because I interned there the previous summer, and just a month before I was about to go, I just decided, this isn't what I want to do. So that happened.
Sorry, what made you realize that it's just not what you wanted to do?
I actually knew for a long time. I think it was just harder to say no to a track that, everyone from where I went to school, Georgetown, was kind of headed towards. My entire college career, everyone was like, you have to work in, banking or consulting. So I was like, yes, I have to work in banking or consulting. And it was almost a matter of self-worth. If I'm going to succeed in this world, I have to work in banking or consulting. So even though I had, I've always worked on small projects of my own, done a little bit of consulting work for other people, it was always, I'm going into this, big corporate life. And I hated it, honestly. I interned there and I hated it. And I still took the job. And yeah, I just realized one day, this isn't what I want to do. And if I want to be successful, I have to do something I'm really passionate about. And that's, where I really got started.
And at that point, you would have been, the term is what, reneging on the offer?
Exactly. Reneging on the offer, which, you're told not to do.
Right. Were there any penalties for that? Because I know that a lot of people maybe have similar realizations, but then they're afraid to say no to the job that they already accepted. So was there actually any penalty for it?
Right. They can always threaten you, but they can't actually do anything, is the reality,
Who's going to sue a college student for not coming to work for them, right?
Exactly. So the funny thing is, I guess, the company I was going to go work for didn't have a huge problem with it. I mean, obviously, their HR tried to call me, but they can't really do anything because it would be the same idea as starting a job and then just, quitting the next day. Right? They can't do anything about it. But I think the Career Center really was very angry. They blacklisted me, actually.
Oh, wow. So the Career Center at Georgetown?
Exactly. Blacklisted me. But what I will say is you're never permanently blacklisted because there's a little caveat. They had little asterisks on the bottom that was like, if you write us a letter, we'll take you off the blacklist.
I'm also sure that when you have a startup doing really, really well, they're going to welcome you back with open arms, right?
Exactly. I actually emailed them. I was like, I'm starting my own business. Um, so, I can't take this job. And they were like, oh, can we actually add you to our alumni
Oh,
database?
of course.
So, they don't actually care.
So is so when you reneged on Morgan Stanley, did you go straight to working on Picnic, or was there something in between?
There was actually something in between. So I was towards the end of college, I was creating seems like so long ago, but creating smart portable charger.
Okay.
And
What
I
does that mean?
recently, right, so what does that mean? Basically, it was a Bluetooth enabled portable charging battery that I wanted to place in different, restaurants and retail outlets and things like that. And where like when you go to a place and you want to get Wi-Fi, how places make you, give them your email or whatever, like you go through this portal essentially to get free Wi-Fi. It was the equivalent of that for charging. So that was what I was working on. At the time I thought it was a great idea. Had some momentum going. We placed it in a bunch of restaurants in New York City and, secured some partnerships with some large brands to pilot it. And I still got a small grant from Georgetown right before I graduated that really enabled me to do this full time. So then, as I started to work on it more, realized, this really wasn't working, pivoted a bunch of times, it didn't work again, and just kind of called it quits after that. And that was basically, my introduction to entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Were you working on that with the same people that you ended up working on Picnic with?
Yeah, so I actually work and live with my boyfriend.
Oh wow.
Yeah, is a challenge of its own.
Yeah, I feel
Um,
like that can be both good and bad. It seems like
yeah, definitely good and bad. We happen to work well together, and we have very different skill sets. So we're not working together because we're in a relationship, but we really feel like we have a good partnership happening. That's I think what's most important.
that's great.
Yeah.
How did your parents react when you turned down Morgan Stanley to go work on your own projects?
Yeah, they didn't react well, which I expected because my parents, are from China.
Okay.
They grew up during the Cultural Revolution, and for them it was they're actually entrepreneurs, but they're not entrepreneurs by choice. So they didn't have an opportunity to work for a big company or anything like that. So for them it was why would you choose to be an entrepreneur? And for they really took it hard because for them, me going into investment banking meant, you know, they could now tell their friends I had a good job, and me now saying, I don't want to work for anyone. I'm not going to take much, take a salary. I'm going to try to do my own thing. It was really hard for them.
Imagine.
Yeah. Especially, if your parents pay for your college, they really, they might expect returns. And I think it's hard.
Did you feel like there was expectation from them to go into certain career paths?
Definitely. My parents specifically wanted me to go into some sort of, banking, consulting type job, something business oriented, which, is kind of what I'm interested in,
Hmm.
but just not working for a big company was, where we differed.
What brought them around, if they ever came around?
I don't think they have come around yet. I think it's hard for parents to be supportive when you haven't really achieved the success that they, kind of expect from you. So, for me to be like, oh, I've learned so much, I couldn't have possibly learned this much in the past 2 years since I've graduated means really not that much to them. But I think they're slowly coming around, and now they're a little more supportive of I think they're coming around, and they'll come around.
That's good.
I have faith in them.
So how do you manage it? Do you just not talk about work too much at home, or?
Yeah, I don't really talk about work with them at all because, not only my parents come from a completely different culture as well, so I think
Mm,
there are a lot of barriers between us, but the biggest thing is, keeping them updated is more of it's I think it's really hard for them to see me fail, so it's easier to just update them when I have good news.
right.
So that's how I kind of see it.
That makes sense. I mean,
And
that's
every time I have a little milestone, I'll update them. But I'm not sure we're at the point where they want to hear about all the times I do feel stressed, and I do
yeah.
it's kind of like oh, I warned you.
Well, you said that they were entrepreneurs themselves, right?
Yes, they were.
So what did they do?
So they were mainly involved in the import export business in China. Yeah. Um,
But not as
yeah,
much in the US, mostly over there.
mostly over there. Never really creating their own product, more like facilitators,
Got it.
I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you've been working on these projects for the last 2 years since graduation, did you raise money for them, or how have you been funding it?
Yeah. So raised money for some of them, enough for me to, you know, enough for me to basically survive, enough for food. And, the first year my parents were very supportive, and they paid for my living accommodations here, which, was really nice of them. And I didn't expect it at all. So, so yeah, I mean, it's nice to, it's nice to have supportive parents in that sense.
Well, it's an interesting example too of something that I think we see fairly frequently with parents who push back against certain career choices, is that in the end they still end up being supportive and loving, right?
Exactly. I mean, they don't really have a choice if you think about
Yeah,
it.
that's fair.
In the end, I mean, they have to be supportive. So,
Exactly, if they want to maintain the relationship, right?
exactly, exactly.
What did you study at Georgetown then? Was it related to anything you're working on now?
It wasn't really. So, I actually studied international relations. So, I had more of a science tech policy focus. And, I wouldn't say I studied anything that I knew I was going to go into work wise. I had a minor in entrepreneurship, which, really doesn't mean anything. But
Yeah, did you
you,
did
you,
you get anything out of entrepreneurship classes?
it wasn't really it wasn't for me, it wasn't about getting anything out of the classes. It was more about, being surrounded by people who, some people at least were interested in going down, similar career paths, and really having that network is still, helpful, even till this day. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's mostly a network thing, be involved in the entrepreneurship community at your school, you know, kind of connecting with alumni, things like that. That really matters a lot. So,
Did you make a habit of that, reaching out to alumni who were working on interesting things to you?
I did, and I did, especially junior and senior years. I was very active actually in terms of reaching out to people, and I think not a lot of people do that. It's kind of this intimidating thing, and I'm not a natural networker by any means. So I actually, push myself. Let me, reach out to at least, two or three people a week, and most people actually respond to you, and you don't have to go in with an ask or anything. Just, ask for advice, or, if you have a small project you're working on, talk to them about it. But it's not so threatening. So
And how did you find them? Just an alumni directory at your school or LinkedIn?
LinkedIn is really good. LinkedIn is great. I think LinkedIn, is it premium, or what
Yeah,
is
they oh my gosh, they have so many annoying tiers of membership. It's
right. So I think I have like one of their paid memberships, but it's honestly one of the best investments that I've made to this day.
huh.
Very high ROI.
You're one of the first people I've talked to who genuinely benefits from LinkedIn.
I do. Yeah, no, honestly, like you never know who you're going to reach, and I especially, I make an effort of specifically in mailing, I guess, um, people who are founders or, very successful people. And you'd be surprised. People do respond.
Well,
So,
what do you say when you reach out then?
I always have this template that I then adapt. And I always like to reference the fact I'm a recent college grad. People are very, open to that. And, also being a woman really helps for me, which is not everyone, but at least half the people out there.
For particularly for reaching out to other women or for men too?
Particularly, exactly, reaching out to other women is really big. There isn't such a big female entrepreneurship community, but it's definitely very tight knit. So that has really helped me. And also, for example, last week I reached out to, well, right now, I'm working on this project, so I'm actively reaching out to a bunch of people. So last week I probably reached out to 40 people on LinkedIn. I almost maxed out, my credits or something
Oh,
like
yeah.
that. But you'd be surprised. I think like 15 or 20 people actually responded to me. So it's a lot of people.
Can you think of a time that one of those outreaches has turned into, something big for you or an important relationship?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I can give you an example actually. 2 or 3 weeks ago, I reached out to the founder of Halo Top Ice Cream. Are you familiar with them?
I'm not.
So Halo Top Ice Cream, is this amazing ice cream company that makes a low-calorie ice cream. They're, everywhere now, and tastes just as good as regular ice cream. So I found out that the one of the founders was actually a Georgetown grad, and you know reached out to him. Didn't really expect a response. I was actually gonna wait another few months before reaching out to him because I was like, oh, I'm not ready. I don't have a product. I don't know what to say. But I was just like, I want your advice, and messaged him. He responded, in under a minute. Was like, call me,
Wow,
and
that's great.
talk to him and just really, I guess really, his perspective on, how do you start a food business? How does distribution work? All these things that would take me, months to learn. He really, broke that down in, just like 40 minutes, and he gave me 40 minutes of his time. So
It's impressive.
something like that. Something like that is very, very huge.
Yeah, and I think that we all underestimate how good it feels for somebody in a position like his to give back and to help somebody who's in a position that he was once in too, right?
Exactly, exactly. And I often think before I reach out to people, no one's going to respond. No one has time to respond. But I think only one person out of all the people I've reached out to has been like, I'm too busy for you. So, if they're too busy, you're like, all right, fine, next. So, the worst thing they could say is no. And honestly, it's, even if one person responds, if that's the right person that will help you grow your business or help you grow your career or just, answer any questions you have, like it's worth it.
And what got you in the habit of doing this? You just decided one day in college to start reaching out, or?
Actually, funnily enough, one of my professors in my entrepreneurship classes from Georgetown, his name was Paul Centenari. He actually, um, said you should reach out to, one person at least. I think it was every week who, is someone, you would like to see. Like what is that question where, who would you like to be at dinner with or sit at dinner with?
Yeah.
Who are the three people or whatever. It's like reach out to one of those people. So I think one of his classmates reached out to the CEO of Amazon or Apple or whatever, and it's basically his whole thing was reach out to one person a week who you really admire, and that's how it got started for me, really.
It's a great habit. I feel like it's something that I've always resisted getting in the habit of doing, but I think you're right. Like it can make a huge difference for anything that you're working on, especially when you
Yeah,
reach out to people who are maybe not public figures and
right.
do not receive a huge amount of inbound already.
Exactly. And, you know, I think it's especially helpful if you are working on your own project. It's really hard to kind of go into it just open-ended, oh, I just want advice in general, they're less like I feel like they're less likely to respond to you. If you say, I'm working on this, even if it's just a small project of your own, or, I'm interested in this, um, at least it shows that you're already, hustling and doing something. So,
And you have more specific questions. You're not giving them something that
exactly.
could require an hour-long explanation of all the intricate details.
Exactly, exactly. Just showing you've done, the legwork is really important.
Right. When you were in college then, did you ever take time off to work on these other projects?
I never took time off, but that being said, I mean, you have a lot of time in college. I think people really underestimate that.
Hmm.
Looking back, I could have worked on so many other projects, but just college students have so much free time on their hands. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Well, we're
And,
using a lot of it for fun stuff too.
exactly, exactly. But just, when I was in college, I would wake up at noon sometimes, or, I just had a crazy schedule that didn't make any sense. And I think it was harder for me to work on things, but I always had worked on one or two projects. I always worked on something. And, since I didn't really feel a connection to what I was studying, I think it made it easier for me to, focus a lot of time on things I actually wanted to learn and things I actually wanted to start. So
When did you start working on these projects outside the classroom?
I started probably, I would say like freshman or sophomore year. Yeah, I've always been doing my own thing, I guess. Just little things. I was selling skateboards for a little bit, just online,
Wait,
and
how were you
I
selling
was
skateboards online?
it was very obscure.
Like
I
import
just I
and
just imported
Amazon or?
skateboards and sold them online. Yeah, exactly.
Ah, cool.
And I mean, it didn't really make a lot of money or anything, but I learned how to build a website that way. Um, and then for example, I think my senior year, my friend and I started this project called Brunch Out, where we would connect people over brunch. Um, you know, friends, pairs of friends, essentially. Yeah, so like things like that. We did that. We had to, figure out, figure out how to acquire customers, figure out how to work with restaurants, have a partnership, get deals, and like negotiate and things like that. These are all skills that really, help you out later on to do.
Yeah, and you said too that you felt like you didn't connect with your studies in college. Was that?
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, 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 sorry.
Oh, I
You
was
can
going to
finish your
say,
question.
was that something that had always been true with you in school, or was it something about college in particular?
I think it's always been true for me in school. I mean, I think in high school it wasn't necessarily the case because I feel like at the time I was just learning a bunch of, fundamentals like algebra, geometry, calculus, things like that. But when it really got to college, I felt, I had to pick a major. This is like the direction I'm going in my life. And before college, I really had no idea what I wanted to study. So when I picked IR, it was very random. I would say I'm interested, in the world. I grew up abroad. I'm interested, in current events, what's happening, things like that. So, for me, it was kind of just, oh, let me just study this and, see where it goes. But I never saw it as like a career, opportunity or anything like that.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And looking back, I probably would have picked a different major because, what I was studying really didn't make sense in terms of, I wasn't learning anything really. And I think, if I went back, I probably would have picked up some hard skills.
Like what?
Probably more comp sci. Um, I don't know. I would just say, for example, even now, right? I wish I really paid attention when I was studying chemistry and studying,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
from now I'm like, now I'm looking at, all these food science articles. I'm like, oh, what was that again?
Yeah,
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the hard sciences are really important too, but I really think computer science is for anything you need to do now. Any business is really tech enabled. Um, it doesn't. I'm not trying to start a tech business, but any business that I would start would be, at least tech light. And I think understanding how, the web works is just really important.
That's true. You want to be fluent enough to be able to talk about it and to be able to sit in on conversations without being completely lost.
Exactly. And, oftentimes in the past, I guess I've worked with, hardware engineers, software engineers, and, it's a lot more helpful if you at least have, the basics down.
Definitely. Do you think it was useful for you though? Are you glad you went to college?
Am I glad I went to college? Yes, I think I think 100% for the network. Made a lot of friends. Also, after graduating college, I've been reaching out to a lot of alumni. So it's really what you make of it. You could go to a great university with a great alumni network and get nothing out of it if you don't leverage it. For me, I am leveraging it. So it was very much worthwhile. Maybe not my classes per se, but the people I met and the people who I continue to meet.
I also saw that you learned Arabic when you were in college, right?
I did.
What inspired that? Because that's not a casual undertaking.
Right. I actually started learning Arabic in high school with you,
Oh,
actually.
that's right. It showed.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it showed. So, we had a
Well,
really great
I
Arabic
was not
program
learning
there.
Arabic, just to be clear.
Yeah, so I actually, for me, it was just, I've always been really interested in languages. Um, I studied French before, some Spanish. And I was like, I already speak Chinese. What is another really hard language
Oh
I could
man,
study?
it's like a triple
And
threat. Yeah.
exactly. So, I mean, at the time, it was, for me, I was always interested in the Middle East as well. So, um, I started studying Arabic in high school. Then I went to Lebanon for a few months and, continued studying there. Then throughout college, I studied Arabic as well as Spanish. I also picked up Korean for a little bit. So, like, I've done my fair share of studying languages.
That's pretty cool. Have you ever thought about doing any kind of work or startup projects around languages?
I have not. That would be very interesting, but I have not. I mean, there are a lot of startups doing great things in that world, especially, hacking, how you can really study languages. I think that's really important. So,
Yeah. Or even the ones doing AR stuff with real world
exactly.
subtitles and
Yeah, no, there's a lot of cool stuff happening there. For me, why I studied it was, at one point I wanted to go into the foreign service. I think just from going to Georgetown and being like, oh, what am I going to do with my life? Oh, this is an option. And studying critical languages at the time seemed, helpful.
so when you were in college and maybe not feeling some of this connection with your studies and feeling like you were going to take on this career that you weren't excited about, at least up until the last minute, did you struggle with any kind of depression at all?
Um, I did, and I still do, really. I think depression has, been a mainstay in my life for the past few years, just because, it's really hard to work on your own business as well. And, in college when you're really struggling between, a stable job that pays a lot and nothing, but, potentially something that pays off later on, it's hard. And I think a lot of people go through it, and it's something that's not really talked about, but I think it's I don't know, I guess it's just been a huge part of my life is dealing with stress and dealing with failure and dealing with, how do I hire other people, working with other people, um, things like that. It's really hard. I would say, like, even now, after having go through a few failed businesses, and still picking my feet up and saying, I'm going to keep doing this. Well, there were a lot of moments where, when I went traveling for a few months, that was because, I was really depressed for a long time. So I didn't even have the energy to keep going.
So, how do you manage it on a more micro scale when you can't take a trip like that?
Sure. I think the biggest thing is having a routine. I wake up every morning and I go to the gym, and that's huge. I think, making sure your body's in good health is so important. And I think that's very, I don't know if I think a lot of entrepreneurs actually talk about this. Uh, having a morning routine. I think Tim Ferriss, talks about that a lot. But really starting off my day, going to the gym, feeling really good about myself and really accomplishing something is so important. Like having at least that one thing every day that you accomplished, even when everything else isn't going well. Um, yeah, another thing I've been doing is just cooking, um, figuring out how to, cook meals really fast and eating healthy, making sure you're in good health is so important.
Yeah, especially when you're setting your own schedule and stuff, it's pretty easy to fall into the trap of filling every
Yeah,
minute with work and not eating healthy and not exercising.
exactly. And
Yeah.
exercising, it's really hard. It's so easy to just say, "Oh, not today, tomorrow." And sleep too. Sleep is so important. I always get 8 hours of sleep every single night, um, and that's rare. A lot of in the beginning, I would work 7 days a week and never take time off, and you just burn out. Now I make sure that I take at least one day off a week to see my friends, and things like that. That's so important.
Yeah, the relaxing and the fitness were really huge for me too. I think when you're removed from the ability to be done and finish, right?
Yeah,
It gets so easy to just keep adding more stuff and keep going and going and going. You almost have to
yeah,
schedule in your relaxation and sleep and rest and exercise instead of the other way around where you're scheduling in
exactly.
work.
Exactly. And also just making sure that you're not doing any busy work, I think is the biggest thing. Because, I think, going to college and, if you've done any internships, you're so used to just, preoccupying your time somehow. And oftentimes it's just busy work. And, I've learned to basically eliminate all of that and, only do the things I need to do. So when it really comes down to it, I don't know if you don't need to feel like you're working all the time to actually have work be done.
Right. That's very true.
Yeah. Not necessarily the 4-hour work week, but you don't need to be working, 13 hours a day to do what you need to do.
Yeah. I saw something from a friend recently that was a pretty good rule, at least for email, which is that if you're looking at your email inbox and you don't have something really important you should be sending to someone right now, you're probably using it to procrastinate.
Correct.
Right.
And one thing I also do is I stop picking up phone calls. Uh, I realized that if anyone needed to call me and if that wasn't scheduled, they could leave a voicemail. And that's really saved a lot of time.
Well, I've also found, I don't know about you, but for some reason, spam calling to cell phones has gotten totally out of control in the last year.
Totally out of control.
Yeah,
That's another huge reason.
I just can't even pick up my phone if I don't recognize the number anymore. It's not worth it.
Yeah. And really, turning my partner, my boyfriend, he's very good about this, but, you know, putting your phone on airplane mode when you're working and just not going on Facebook and not going on your email just to, refresh and actually focusing. I think that's huge. Just being able to do that in a space of your own where you're not distracted. You can get a lot of stuff done in 2 hours. Just doing 2 hour chunks is really good.
Oh yeah. Do you usually work in chunks like that, like
I do.
Pomodoro or deep work or?
Yeah, I don't. I tried Pomodoro for a while, but I think what's been really working for me is just 2 hour chunks. I just keep it really simple. Work for 2 hours, then I go for a walk, come back, work for another 2 hours, and it really works out really well. And taking breaks and being outside, getting fresh air, that's so important.
Oh yeah, it's amazing how big of a difference that makes to just get up and walk around every hour or two and come back.
Exactly.
Like you think you
Exactly.
can't take the break, but you always find that you just feel way better when you come back to it.
Way better. Yeah, and also just I think one big thing I started to do that really opened my day was going to the gym in the morning. I used to go to the gym in the evenings because, my whole life I was like, why would I wake up early to go to the gym? But I actually changed that up, a few months ago. And now at night I have so much time to just do whatever I want when other people aren't working.
Right.
So I really feel like you can get ahead that way.
Do you do more cardio, weightlifting?
I actually do CrossFit.
Oh, okay.
So, that's one of my other things is feeling like you've, accomplished something every day,
Right.
at least first thing in the morning is that's why I do CrossFit because, everything's very much timed and, you're completing a workout and, you're doing it at a certain time, you're doing it at a certain weight. So for me, that's really important.
And they've got everything planned for you, so you don't have to think about it too much when you go in.
Oh, 100%. It's huge. I could, for me, it's, I pay more to go to the gym than that's my biggest expense every month is the gym, probably. And it's so worth it for me not to have to think about my workout, not to, go to people go to an Equinox or whatever, and, they just kind of walk around, go on a machine for
Play
five
around on the
minutes.
weight machines and
Exactly, you kind of exactly. And I do that when I go to a gym. So you got to put yourself in a situation where you maximize your time. And I think CrossFit really does that.
do you have any hobbies? Because one thing that I've found difficult is setting aside time for non-productive, just fun hobby-like activities during the day.
I think during the week, my hobby is going to the gym.
Yeah,
I
that's
wouldn't really
fair.
say it's a hobby though, but it's the one thing I do that isn't work. Otherwise, I've, really picked up cooking, and that's, I guess, somewhat of a hobby when you're not, under a time crunch.
When you
It's
can
a nice
enjoy it
thing.
and experiment with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One other thing I do is so I live in New York and I leave the city pretty much every week
Oh, that's smart.
once. So so there you can actually leave the city, by train or by car or however you want to do it, and there are a lot of hikes close by, there are a lot of things you can do just to get out. I like to walk a lot, things like that.
Coming back to some of the work topics a little bit, do you have a favorite failure or screw up that you ended up learning a ton from?
You know, in my last business, the whole thing was kind of a failure screw up that I learned from.
Yeah.
So the whole thing, looking back, right?
Right.
When you're, when you're actually working on something, it's really hard to be critical, and you should really be your, biggest, you should really critique yourself a lot, but it's really hard to do. At the time people were like, this is so capital intensive, but I was like, we can make this work. Just, as long as it's a high volume business, it's fine if the margins are low. But really understanding the economics behind what you're doing first is so important. And, not just solving a problem, but actually being able to make money, sustainably. It's really hard, I think, today, especially when you're trying to start a company. A lot of companies value their success on how much, venture funding they've raised. And I've learned that that doesn't mean much. And, you know, companies run out of money all the time, even if they raised, $40 million dollars or more. And, you really need to make sure that you have a sustainable business model that you can make money from. And, some of the companies I admire the most are the ones that bootstrap their business all the way.
Right. Like Basecamp and who are the other big ones that are pretty known for it?
Do you know Tuft and Needle?
No, what are they?
So they're a mattress company. They're similar to Casper. They actually started before Casper.
All right.
So two guys actually bootstrapped their company entirely, and they're doing like over 100 million in sales a year.
Oh, wow. I
Yeah,
think
so
Casper
raised
is sort of like the venture funded version of it, right?
exactly. But one company, the two founders own 100% of the company. The other company, and so that's really, really what's impressive to me. And I think especially living in a place where perhaps there are a lot of other companies that are venture funded, you lose sight of the fact that, traditionally and even now, a lot of companies don't raise equity.
Well, and also, I think people forget that the model for venture capital is you fund 10 companies and one succeeds.
Exactly. And, looking at most venture funded companies, they're not very lean about the way they operate.
No, definitely not.
Part of it is, making your employees happy, but if your employees aren't really working, they're napping half the time, is that I don't it's really hard. So I think making sure that you are still being lean, even if you've raised money, or especially if you're spending your own money, you probably do already, but that's really important.
Is there anything that you believed when you were still a student that you now know is false? Like particularly around work and life?
I think one thing I've really learned the past 2 years since I've graduated is that, I think as a student, especially if you're, high achieving growing up, you went to a good school your whole life, you've never failed in life. Even if you didn't get into, the best school, you're probably still going to, a good school, whatever, something like that. It's a lot of people just don't face failure. And I think you think you're invincible somewhat, and you think, no matter, what you do, you're getting a B, or you're not like failing, and nothing's really going to happen. And I think the past years, what I've learned is that, first, you can fail a lot of times, but that you really have to, I think the thing I've learned is perseverance. You really just have to keep going. There are founders who, you listen to their stories, and, they started 20 businesses, and, they were like, if I didn't pick my feet up and start my 21st, I would not be who I am today, you know? And I think that's the key, is just everything you do, you have to make sure you're learning something, and, you never give up. Just because you fail once doesn't mean you're gonna, always fail.
Is there any book in particular that had a big impact on you when you were a student, that if you could pick one, you would give to all the incoming freshmen at Georgetown?
Is there a book? Yeah, let me think. I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. I think this was probably really, I feel like this is very cliched, but I really think the lean startup method is so important if you're trying to start your own business or do anything of your own. I I think surprisingly, a lot of people have not read it. People might have heard of, the lean startup method, but just reading the book or a summary of it, I think is so important. I go back and read it now and then just to, keep myself checked. Am I really being lean? I go through the questions like, am I doing this?
The original one by Eric Ries, right?
Eric Ries.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, so that's really important. I think just understanding, are you doing it in a lean way, and are you making sure that you're not spending money until you have to, and that you're actually solving a problem? I think that's so important. Sometimes you're working on something and you start to spend money and you start to really, ramp up. You just forget about these basic things. And that's the one thing I would recommend every person read, one book.
Any just last thoughts or pieces of advice, particularly things that you wish someone had told you when you were a student looking at some of these non-traditional career paths?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just, not, I think ask for help. I think ask for advice and ask for help. Referencing back to the beginning of this podcast, this interview, just reaching out to people, you never know what you're going to get. A lot of the people who've invested in my companies, a lot of the people who have really given me a lot of help, who've, become my mentors, those are the people I just reached out cold. And I think, speaking to some of my friends now who don't do it, it's astonishing to me given, how much I've gotten out of that. It's so important to reach out to people, and, you should be doing it every day.
That's great advice for people listening, and for me too, because I certainly don't do enough of that.
Always start.
Yeah, exactly. Need to. Yeah, Helen, thanks so much for coming on and talking about all of this. When will people be able to buy the pasta?
Yeah, so hopefully, we're hoping in the next month, but, as these types of things go, it'll probably end up taking longer. I feel like yesterday I felt like, we can launch this in the next 2 weeks, and today it's like maybe in 2 months. So
well, we'll have to keep in touch then. But do you have a site or anything that we should tell people to check out?
Not yet. Not a site yet, but it's not active is what I'm saying. It's not live, but it will be on balloonfoods.com.
Ooh, I love that. I love that name. And that is a really fun URL to have too.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. The goal is, hopefully this is not just a pasta company, and that's pasta is just the beginning. So
exactly. And what if people want to find you personally? Twitter, Instagram?
I don't use Twitter.
Okay.
Very active on Instagram, and also, I guess, LinkedIn. Am I there
That's right.
yet?
No, people have to send you in-mail on LinkedIn. That should be the call to action for this.
Right, but I mean, if you want to email me, my personal email is
What is-
guohelen3@gmail.com, I guess.
Perfect. And
I do email. LinkedIn, like email is expensive because
yeah,
every one of those messages costs you something.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's how they make all their money, right?
It's worth it.
And then on Instagram, Guo Helen, right?
Go Helen, exactly.
Perfect. Well, Helen, thank you so much for coming on today. And I'm sure everyone got a lot out of this. And hopefully we can send them to check out your pasta too when this launches.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Nat.
All right. Have a good one.
You too.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Nat Chat. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe to Nat Chat in iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. Second, if you're trying to take advantage of some of the information from this episode, be sure you check out the show notes at nataliason, nateliason.com/podcast, and find a friend, because implementing a lot of this stuff is much easier if you have somebody to do it with. And finally, if you enjoyed this episode and you've been enjoying other episodes of the podcast, please leave it a review on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen to your casts so that more people can find it. This is the best way for it to get some more exposure and to make sure that I can keep bringing these episodes to you. With that, thank you and have an awesome rest of your day.